What's going on, guys? Let me know if you can hear me. Thank you. So, tomorrow we have a conditional severe risk for much of the state, really. The highest potential currently sits along the west central and southwestern parts of Michigan, but we think that's going to extend over into the eastern lower part of Michigan towards the Metro Detroit area. So, taking a look at some of these models that we had some new guidance come out this afternoon. Kind of gives us a better idea of what kind of threats we could be looking at, as well as timing and stuff like that. Starting to come a little bit into focus here. So, looking at a few of the models, we do have the HRRR model. This is one of the most reliable short-term models that we have. We start to see, now this is at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, and you can see here with the greens and the blues, the greens are a little bit lower dew points and the blues are higher dew points. So we see this gradient here of blue, which is basically your moisture pushing up into the southwest part of Michigan. And by noon, it drapes across Grand Rapids over to Jackson into Lenawee County, down by Adrian and Monroe County. And that continues to work up into the central parts of the state, into Lansing and Mount Pleasant, all the way up and encompassing the entire lower peninsula. And up in the UP as well, we do have good moisture content up there. By 7 o'clock, we have dew points somewhere in between the 62 and 66 ish area. So, dew points and moisture definitely going to fuel thunderstorms. So, when we have all that moisture, we have the heat from the day, we have instability. So, looking at the instability model, again, you're going to see that gradient kind of show up here on this model in the early morning hours. This is 11 a.m. You see the purples and blues there start to push up into Michigan. And by 2 o'clock, it's straight from Grand Rapids down into the Lenawee County, Monroe County area. And that continues to push into the central and northern parts of the state, as well as the UP, seeing some of this instability as well. Here's what I want to point out. Number one, overnight hours. This is midnight, and there's a good amount of instability still left in the state. That is due to increased wind shear. If I go ahead and switch over to a different model here, I look at our 800, or go ahead and do the 925 millibar, which is about 2,000 feet off the ground. Go ahead and zoom forward here. Let's actually zoom into the Midwest area. There we go. So here is the wind speeds in the lowest levels of the atmosphere. So we see those, the nudge or the nose of the green and brighter green starts to nose into Michigan around 11 o'clock. And by 2 and then 5 and then 8 o'clock, and then by 11 o'clock, this wind starts to ramp up. After 8 p.m., there is an increased wind due to the low-level jet. So low-level jet is basically an increased area of winds in the atmosphere. It can be at the lowest level, it can be mid-level, it can also be at the highest level too. It all depends on the setup, and this particular setup has a low-level jet at both mid and low levels. What that's going to do is increase our wind shear and also transport moisture past sunset. So just because the sun goes down tomorrow does not mean the severe threat is over. Now, there is some variables here that we're kind of watching in terms of timing. We do have the afternoon guidance from these models showing that we do have a line of storms. First off, I want to mention, I know I'm kind of all over the place here. I'm going to try and go in order. We're watching out west tonight for an area of storms to form. So we see on the model here, if we look out into the Iowa and Nebraska and North Dakota area, South Dakota area, we have this complex of storms begin to fire up. This is tonight at 9 p.m., so another hour or so. This should be what the radar looks like. And then this continues to push to the eastward. And we're questioning if that's going to reach Michigan. If that reaches Michigan, it'll lower our severe threat by knocking some of the instability down. We'll have to see how the atmosphere recovers. If it does recover, we'll be looking at a severe threat later on in the evening, possibly. But right now, the models do have this weakening as this continues to the east. And by the time it hits Michigan, it's pretty much decayed. But the energy, the piece of energy is still there. And this model takes that and starts to fire up some redevelopment in the mid-afternoon time frame in the western part of the state, and that encompasses anywhere from Mount Pleasant all the way down to the border of Indiana and Ohio, and that continues into the eastern parts of lower Michigan in about the 7 o'clock time frame. So between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m., we have a threat, a low end threat for severe weather, just because we do have that moisture. As we looked at, the moisture instability starts to work its way up into the state. So a lot of different scenarios possible. So if that does happen, we do have a low end severe threat. But I want to emphasize that our wind shear that we need for damaging winds and also possibility of tornadoes, the wind shear for those doesn't really ramp up until after 8 p.m. So if these storms do come through in the afternoon, they won't be in as good as an environment as we would like to see for severe weather. Will that mean we don't get severe weather? Not exactly. We do still have a good amount of moisture, instability. You could see some downdrafts, microburst. And also, if we have any leftover outflow boundaries from last night's, or really tonight's, but tomorrow morning we'll be looking at last night's storms. If we have any remnant outflow boundaries that could enhance wind shear, we could see a few isolated tornadoes as well. We'll have to watch the afternoon very closely, but the main severe ingredients don't really come together until after 8 p.m. So if we do have a gap where we can destabilize in the afternoon and evening, we could be talking a higher end threat in the evening time. But as of right now, the models are kind of hinting at a afternoon threat that kind of suppresses instability. Severe threat is still there, but if we want the highest severe threat, we want to wait until after 8 p.m. where instability would be at its highest if no storms happen in the afternoon. Another model, or one more model to look at for the radar, that was a NAM model. This is the HRRR model. Go ahead and zoom this forward. The same thing. We have this complex that forms into Illinois, and this is 8 a.m. tomorrow, and that continues eastward. It dies, but then the energy from that sparks off more showers and storms in west central and central parts of Michigan, and that will continue to the east. This is 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. By the time it hits Metro Detroit, it's an organized squall line with potential for damaging winds and also some hail. So we could have multiple scenarios. It's a complicated forecast, I know. We're going to be tracking it all day. We'll have updates at 2 a.m. when SPC issues their new outlooks, and we'll also have updates in the early morning hours. We'll go live again tomorrow morning to discuss it. But the takeaway from this is afternoon threat would be mainly wind and hail, a possibility of a tornado somewhere in the state, depending on if outflow boundaries can form. And then if we can hold off and destabilize through the afternoon, the evening threat would be the highest threat, and that would include the possibility of all hazards, including wind, hail, and tornadoes, just given the amount of wind shear. So with that being said, I think I covered most of this. I know it's really confusing, so I'm sure we're going to have lots of questions here. Any questions for you guys? Bobby, right now the SPC has the very lowest threat for Michigan. It's a marginal. I expect this to go into a slight risk, so it should be level 2 of 5. Right now, they've only introduced the wind and hail probabilities, but I would expect them to introduce a small tornado threat, especially in central and southern parts of Michigan, and particularly on the west side. And I go ahead and just throw this out there. Aside from that squall line that comes through in the morning hours out west, that shouldn't cause any severe weather for us. We do expect it to decay, and then more storms could fire off the energy from that piece, but I don't expect that to be any severe weather for us. Can Detroit get into slight risk? I would not be shocked. I would not be shocked if we all I'm not going to say all, but central and southern parts of Michigan, I would not be shocked if we saw a slight risk introduced. I do want to mention, though, the entire state does have the potential for severe weather tomorrow, just given the amount of moisture we have, given the amount of wind shear, especially in the evening. If we can get storms to get those deep updrafts, we could be looking at the wind and hail potential ever in the state. but the models really are hinting and focusing in on the central and southern parts of the state. So anywhere from the Grand Rapids, Lansing, Flint, and then south. Not to say we're not going to get anything north of there, but the highest threat appears right now to be in that area to the south. Yes, Jessica, if you want severe weather tomorrow, the highest threat, we have to stay dry as possible. We have to see sunshine. I do want to point out, though, just because we have a very strong low-level jet in the evening, I would not be shocked to see widespread storms overnight for us, which could give some isolated severe potential. It's just going to be a matter of if we have the instability to do it. Flooding could also be a concern as well, because if we get those training thunderstorms that go over the same place, the moisture in the atmosphere is really, really thick, so it'll dump a lot of rain in a short amount of time. So flooding could also be a concern tomorrow. Yeah, Jenny, for right now, there is a possibility of the afternoon round. In fact, I'd say that's looking at the models this afternoon, it's likely that we see a round in the afternoon. If we don't see that round, it's concerning for severe weather later in the evening. Yes, Oakland County is included. Everybody asking about their specific location. You all have a severe threat tomorrow. It's just going to be highest in the Grand Rapids, Lansing, Kalamazoo, Coldwater, Detroit, Ann Arbor, Jackson, Adrian, Monroe, Downriver. Those areas will see the highest threat. If the HRRR model's onto anything with this first line, anywhere from Lansing to the east would probably get some pretty good winds in the peak heating right around 5 to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. If that's the case, we'll have to watch that closely, and that could be a higher, like a slight risk introduced for that if we have more confidence in that happening. But again, the models have been a little iffy on firing off storms. So we'll have to see how the models do in the morning to kind of see if they're playing moisture properly, if they're playing surface temperatures good. Like we can look at real-time data and compare to see how models are doing to see if they have a good handle on it. And we'll have a better idea tomorrow morning. New to MSC? Yeah, you are welcome, John. Thanks for following. What is the forecast for next weekend? That's a little far out. I will say we are heading into a more active stretch of weather. So the next couple of weeks, we could see multiple rounds of shower storms and potential severe weather. But to pinpoint days this far out, that's a little hard to do. Any other questions, guys? When does severe weather usually go away? The short answer is we do have, and we have had in Michigan, severe weather all months. We've had in December, we've had in January, February, and March. We've had it in the winter, spring, summer, and fall. The right answer for you would be when we get into the November timeframe into December, that is usually when that pattern will flip to a more winter-like pattern. But severe weather is still possible in November and even December. I was actually chasing Indiana back in December of 2022, I want to say, or 2021. The night of the Mayfield tornado, if you guys recall, the Mayfield, Kentucky tornado, it was that night. I have a military helicopter over my house right now, heading toward Dundee. That's weird. No problem, Diane. Thank you, Dave, for following. A lot of new guys on here. Good to see it. What's up, Chris? Yes, Jeanette, this is for tomorrow. Looking for Belleville Air Show. So Belleville Air Show. Great question. You'll have a chance of showers and storms early on in the day, right around noon to 3. I would say all afternoon you have a threat, but it's kind of up in the air at this point, just given the uncertainty with how stuff evolves out to our west tonight. So I'm going to say you have a chance of rain all afternoon and storms all afternoon, but the main severe threat will hold off probably until peak heating around 3 to 6 for you guys. And that's if the first line is actually there. We have some uncertainty still. Right now, it's looking like we're going to have that first line come through. We'll have to see how it plays out. Given that there's a lot of moisture in the atmosphere and the low-level jet comes in after 8 p.m., the chances of rain lasting through the overnight hours is actually quite high. So if we have instability present and we have a good atmosphere that's not overturned, we could be talking some damaging winds as well as some large hail and isolated tornadoes in the overnight hours, which is what I'm concerned about. But with these models throwing out that first line coming through, it's not as high confidence, because if that happens, we have the atmosphere in question for recovery, and there's just so many moving parts to this. Crystal, Van Buren County is in the risk. Wind and hail are going to be your primary hazards tomorrow, but we're not going to rule out an isolated tornado somewhere. Yes, Brianna, I would say all of Michigan has it. Currently, the SPC has left out the very far eastern portions of the Lower Peninsula and Upper Peninsula. But given the atmosphere conditions and profiles, it's the same all across the state. In fact, some of the models actually have a higher threat in the east than the west. So I fully expect the SPC to reflect that in their next update at 1:30 in the morning, or 2 in the morning, actually. What is Southeast Michigan's most active severe weather month? That is going to be June. From June to August is our most active. For tornadoes, it is June. This year, though, it has been July. We've had four or five tornadoes in July. So, but historically speaking, it's June. Stanton tomorrow. Again, everywhere in the state has potential for damaging winds, large hail. The isolated tornado threat is going to be mainly in the southern part of the state, right along 94, maybe as far north as 96. But everybody has a threat tomorrow, one way or the other. Traveling from Elkhart to Flint. So you could have that first line. You could be dealing with the first line. Although if you're leaving from Elkhart, you may be behind that first line at 6 o'clock. So you should be clear. But given the moisture starts to increase via low-level jet around that time frame, we could have more development happening around that time. But the organized line that the models have is off to your east. So you should be clear of that. Just some pop-ups probably. What time for Grand Rapids? So looking at the model that we have, the guidance that we have currently, we do have some showers popping up around the 10 to 12 a.m. or 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. time frame. And more organization occurs as the afternoon goes on off to your east. And then a secondary round is possible behind that around 8. And then again, we do have some showers and storms forming off to our west overnight, pushing into the area in the overnight hours. So we do have multiple rounds. So off and on, I'd say pretty much all day for Grand Rapids. Again, this model, the HRRR model, tends to run drier than usual. So it may be underdoing the response on radar. It could be underdoing the response on radar because it's underdoing the moisture. Whereas the NAM model overdoes moisture, so it could be overdoing radar. It's a lot going on here. But the NAM model for Grand Rapids, again, showers and storms coming your way around noon, and then more organization happens around 4 o'clock. And this one has a line hitting you about 5 o'clock. And that pushes off to the east. We have more showers that form behind that. So, and then Saturday, we do have lingering instability hanging around too. So we could be talking a few storms firing up on the far eastern side of Michigan on Saturday, but that's still uncertain, just depending on how quickly the system moves. Breckenridge be all right for the most part. So overall, the threat tomorrow is on the lower side. If certain conditions come together, it could increase a little bit, but overall, Breckenridge, you'll be looking at a wind threat and a hail threat. Nothing's going to blow you out of the water or anything like that, but it's something to pay attention to because any storm tomorrow could be packing some pretty gusty winds and some large hail. I wish I could give you that specific answer, Rodney. The answer to that question is possibly. The ingredients are there for severe weather. So it's definitely possible. But to answer that in particular, I really can't. Just know you have a threat tomorrow. Damaging winds are your first threat. Hail's going to be your second. Tornado threat is very low tomorrow. Brown City, exact same thing. Wind and hail are going to be your main threats. It's a low-end threat, but it does exist. Any other questions, guys? Kalamazoo County Fair, the takeaway from this is you have rain chances all day in Kalamazoo. Some storms could be severe, especially in the mid to late afternoon into the evening time frame. So just be aware for anything. If you see a storm moving in, just get to shelter. That might be a good idea. Overall, the threat tomorrow is on the lower side right now. It could increase if conditions come together. But wind and hail are your main threats. We get this question a lot. Will any watches be issued for severe weather tomorrow in southeast Michigan? So in general, watches do not get issued or even discussed until storms are either happening or are about to happen. We're not going to know this until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest. It's possible we could see a watch. It's possible we may not. So, excuse me. We'll have to wait and see for that. We really just, some events are pretty clear cut. Yeah, this is going to have a watch. This is going to need a watch. But this event, we'll have to wait and see. We can't really answer that until tomorrow. Mary asks, is there one computer model that seems to be more accurate? Oh, boy. We have a lot of models to go through. We have the NAM, the NAM3, HRRR. We have something called the FV3. We have a whole blend. We have the RRFS model. We have so many models. I'll just leave it at that. The most accurate model, in my opinion, this year has been the NAM3 for Michigan. The HRRR has been so dry that on some days that we've had tornadoes in Michigan, it didn't fire a single storm in Michigan. It's that bad. The NAM3 has done a really good job of placement of the storms on radar, but it's not done a good job in terms of the environment around those storms. It's good with placing storms, but not really the ingredients for them. So it's really important to take to know what each model bias has. For example, HRRR is dry, the NAM is moist. You have to blend them all together to kind of get a conclusion. But I'd say the NAM3 this year has been the most accurate. Cold water, yes, cold water is in the threat tomorrow. Wind and hail is your main threat. Multiple rounds are possible. Can it just snow already? Oh, Brianna, come on. We're talking snow in August. El Nino is the current pattern that we are in, which historically speaking, El Nino is a warmer winter. So we may not see our first snow until, end of December into early January. That's just a guess. I mean, obviously we really can't say it this far out, but historically speaking, we might be looking at a more mild winter. But don't quote me on that. Everybody asking Davison. I see somebody asking for Northwest Indiana, Sandusky. You all are in the threat, Sandusky timing. So you're looking probably for the severe weather. It's going to be later on in the evening, probably from 5 to 7. And then anything that pops up after that is in question. But anything after that could have potential to be severe. So starting at 5, I'd say is a good guess for Sandusky. Coldwater, you're looking mainly in the early to mid-afternoon time frame after 1 o'clock. And again, anything that pops up in the state after this first line comes through, if it comes through, it does have potential for severe weather. We'll have updates on the page, though. If it doesn't look like it's going to shape up, we'll have updates on the page. But for right now, I'm just communicating the threat for you. The wind shear really increases after 8 p.m., so anything before that, we'll have to kind of see how that develops. Northwest Indiana, you guys do have a threat. Take a look at you guys real quick. You have some pop-ups in the afternoon and evening time frame. Nothing organized on this model, but again, this model could be completely off too. So I'll have to wait for tomorrow and kind of see what it's looking like. But yeah, you do have a threat tomorrow. Yes, rain is likely in southeast Michigan, Rhonda. Davison, you're looking at the 4 to 5 o'clock time frame. Yes, Linda, everywhere in Michigan does have a threat for severe weather tomorrow. So a lot of people ask in specific areas. The overall takeaway is everybody has a threat tomorrow. It's on the lower end of things, but the threat is there. If conditions become, or should I say, if conditions do come together more favorably, we could be looking at a higher threat. Jonathan asks, are there chances for isolated tornadoes? So going over this again for people who are just hopping in here, the tornado threat is going to be largely dependent on two things. The first one being instability. So if we get this first line coming through in the afternoon, it will lower instability for when the wind shear is highest later on the evening and overnight hours. So wind shear ramps up after 8 p.m. So from 8 p.m. through the overnight hours, wind shear is at its most favorable for tornadoes. If we have instability present, we could be talking a chance for isolated tornadoes. If the afternoon line does come through, it will lower the chances entirely. The tornado threat with that afternoon line is low and going to be very dependent on if there is outflow boundaries from previous storms. It's possible, but in the afternoon, it's a very low threat. In the evening and overnight hours, it's a little bit higher if instability is there. I hope that makes sense. I'm not sure if this is actually a question. Oh, Brian, we're about 4 months away from seeing snow, bud. Yes, guys, this is a huge snowstorm. We're talking a foot of snow in all of Michigan. We're gonna see. This is your milk and bread warning, guys. Go get it right now. Yes, a huge snowstorm. All right, you guys are getting too hyped up for snow. We still have September, October, November, and maybe most of December to go through before we see our first snowflakes. We will be live on Facebook and YouTube if need be tomorrow. I believe we have a few chasers going out. I'll be out if need be. So we got you covered. If anything does happen in the state tomorrow, we'll be here streaming it. Any other questions, guys? Wake me up when it snows. All right, I'll do that, Brianna. We do forecast snow and we do chase snowstorms, so you'll see snow content on our page. All right, guys. No one has any more questions. I'm going to go ahead and hop off here. So now is the last chance. But again, looking at the overall threat tomorrow, conditional threat for severe weather, potentially in multiple rounds. First chances are just after the noon time frame, but the highest chances are going to be toward peak heating, right around the 4 to 5 o'clock time frame, and then continuing into the evening if instability can linger around long enough for storms to feed off of. With that being said, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Leave a like if you haven't already, and we will see you guys tomorrow morning with an update.